Whose is it?
Good response.
Probably Marion's.
Church humor is good. We have all the clocks on campus and none of them are the same, right? I think it's time to begin. Are we?
Are you using different microphones?
Well, good morning and welcome to the 2019 Timothy Lecture. It's an honor and a pleasure to be able to introduce our guest presenter today. And I hope that you had a good opportunity to get acquainted with him. Some of you already know him or know of him. The Timothy Lecture every year is designed to be something where in the saddle experienced practitioner, someone who has significant experience, is able to come and share with you some of the significant components that have been part of his ministry, and that's varied across the years. This year, the Timothy Lecture is a little bit different from the rest, in part because of a tragedy that occurred just about a year ago when the Humboldt Broncos bus was in a severe and tragic accident. And Pastor Clint Magnus is one of our graduates. He served for a number of years out in our parish in Kitimat Terrace, and had not been in Humboldt for very long, really, before this tragedy took place. But in many ways, God places people into their positions. As Esther was told by Mordecai, who knows but for such a time as this, right? And that doesn't mean just the big dramatic parts of life, but it can mean the time you put your hand on the shoulder of someone who's going through a very difficult time. But for such a time as that, God is using you as the extension of His hands, His mouth, His ears, His presence in the midst of a tragedy. Pastor Magnus is not only an experienced pastor, but he also is father-in-law to a pastor. His son-in-law is Cody Cooper, one of our graduates also. Cody serves at the LaRange Mission, and one of our few really embedded indigenous community missions. And I think that's a unique and distinct role for Cody. When he went on his vicarage and then was assigned there in his first call, it pushed him and challenged him, but he and Pastor's daughter Lyndon and their grandkids seem to have adjusted quite well to the challenges that are there in that community and the ministry needs that are there. But today we're not focusing so much on ministry in northern Saskatchewan in general, but on the ministry that Pastor Magnus was called to do, in particular surrounding that Humboldt bus accident. We have 3 presentations and time for interaction. The first hour, and then Pastor Magnus will be leading us in chapel. Then we'll have an hour after chapel. We'll break for lunch, and we'll meet for an hour in the afternoon. But again, each of the designs is a bit open-ended, allowing there to be interaction, conversation, and dialogue about the ministry in general and what that means. Let's start with a word of prayer, and then we'll bring Pastor Magnus forward. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the way that St. Paul mentored so many people in his life, how there were companions who served alongside of him and were taught and grew from that. And we thank you for the spirit of the Timothy Lecture that allows us all to learn and grow from the pastors who come in and are share part of their story with us. We thank you for bringing Pastor Magnus safely here today. We thank you for his ministry in the past, especially at the face of that crisis in Humboldt. But also we thank you for his ongoing ministry as it proceeds out of what he did and what took place there. We ask your blessing upon us this day. upon the conversation, the topic, that you would shape our ears to hear, our hearts to be touched, our minds to wrestle with some of the difficult questions and have ideas about where we would go and what we would do when ministry challenges face us. And we ask that you would, at the end of the day, allow us to give thanks and praise to you for all the ways that you have been at work in this scenario. Continue to bless us now through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Pastor Magnus, you want to come forward?
No, I just talked to that before.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, good.
Awesome. Well, got to meet some of you already, but it's a joy to be here with you today. First off, I should start by saying that last week, where my wife and myself, we went on a little road trip down into the States for a little break from the cold weather, and on our way back, we stopped at Kansas City and spent the night with Dr. Kettner and Mindy. So I bring you his greetings. He said, make sure to tell everybody at the seminary I said hi. In fact, I said, he says, you can call me Ed now. And I went, no. That's not going to happen. Anyway, he's still Dr. Kettner as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, so the greetings from Dr. Kettner. Also, I guess I should just start at the outset by just sort of telling you a little bit about myself. I think some of you know some already, but I'm married to Joyce. We have 6 kids, and one of them's married to Cody Cooper, who's the pastor in LaRange. We have 7 grandkids, 3 of which live here in Edmonton and 4 up in LaRange, so that's all great. It wasn't that long ago that I sat in the same place where you guys are sitting here right now. I haven't been a pastor my whole life. It was a later in life thing for me. I wound up in Calgary after school and started a little business there. I had a little construction company in Calgary, and I ran that for almost 20 years. And somewhere along the middle of the way there, we moved out to a little town called Carstairs, Alberta, which is just north of Calgary, and we began attending church at Redeemer Lutheran Church in Didsbury. So we, like many, found that it was we wanted to get our kids into Sunday school, and so that's where we landed. Neither myself or my wife have been raised Lutheran. We actually stumbled on that lovely church in Didsbury quite by I wouldn't say accident. I would say it was divine intervention, but we wound up there and made it our home and went to church there for quite a number of years. So at one point there along the way, things were ticking along pretty good, and I woke up one morning and I just had this idea in my head. It was kind of a wacky idea, and I said to it was kind of building as the day went on, and as the day wore along, I felt I need to talk to Joyce about this. So we got a little time away from the kids, and I said to Joyce, I said, okay, so I'm going to run something past you, but don't answer right away because this is really out of left field. So just think about this and take as long as you need and get back to me, whenever you think it's appropriate. And I said, so what would you think if we sold our acreage? We built this acreage on 4 acres of land there out in Carstairs. We had the business from almost 20 years. I said, what if we sold all of that? And we moved up to Edmonton, and I went to seminary to be a pastor. And I kind of gave one of these, and she said, yeah, I think that's exactly what we should do. And I went, oh, okay. Well, I guess God had been preparing her too, and so that's what we did. We came to Edmonton, and to make a long story short, I did very similar. I was probably about 40 at the time. I went through exactly everything you guys are going through. Before we came, I had to learn Greek and Hebrew. I did that by correspondence in the cab of my truck, mostly while I was running the business, and I did my Greek through Three Hills Bible College, and I did my Hebrew from Dr. Raflab. who sent me a box full of cassette tapes of Hebrew. I actually had to go out and find a cassette deck so I could actually take my Hebrew. Anyway, got it done. Had to do a few university courses. Anyway, long story short, we got here. Went through the first couple of years, as you guys have done, or are in the middle of doing it. And then we were placed out in Kitimat. We talked about this out in the coffee room a little bit, but we spent a year there, and then we were asked if we would consider staying in a second year because there was nobody behind us that somebody felt was it could be sort of out on in a lonely situation out the end of the road by themselves. So we stayed the second year. Then we came back and finished up seminary. And lo and behold, on placement night, and that day that we all sort of get tense about and wring our hands, and we go up on the stage and get our placements for as candidates. Dr. Chambers standing there, and he had the paper in his hand. I'm going, okay, where's it going to be? Kitimat! So we're back out to Kitimat. So we're out there for about 9 years. Okay, I'm just trying to make this as short as possible. Anyway, so lots happened, of course, and it was awesome. But then one night on a Sunday night, the phone rang, and it was Larry Duran, the chairman of the congregation in Humboldt. And he says, so we just had our call meeting, and we went through all the bunch of names that were brought forward, and we have made the decision to call you to be our pastor, and we would ask you to prayerfully consider that. Well, that was not really what I was thinking. Again, you know, God has a way of springing these things on us, and so I said, okay. And so we started talking about it, praying about it. Well, what are we going to do with this called the Saskatchewan? And as the time went on, it became overwhelmingly clear that yes, we're going to take this call. And so one of the things I did is I asked them. I said, so why did you call me? I said, why? Out of all the names that you had, what in particular is it that made you call me? Just so I know what your expectations are, and what that's all about. And Larry said, we called you because we want to have a presence in this community, and we think you can do that for us. He said, our church here has been in Humboldt for all these years. He says, and nobody knows who we are. Nobody knows where we are. We're a non-entity in this community. He says, and we think that you can help us based on, you know, the Kitimat experience and such. We think that you can help us have a face and a presence in the community of Humboldt. I thought, okay, good. And, you know, we all have different gifts. God gives us different abilities and gifts, and I think that that's one gift that He has given me. All my business experience and all these things, I'm not scared to go and shake somebody's hand and make myself known and get out there and roll up sleeves and do all those sorts of things. And so I thought, well, this sounds like a match, literally, made in heaven. And so let's do it. So we went to Humboldt, moved to Humboldt, and a year, almost a full year went by, and everything was going along great. Ministry was going well, and then all of a sudden the unimaginable happened. And let me backtrack a little bit here. What happened was our ministerial in Kitimat is like most ministerials. It's a little dysfunctional. It's but there's things that we can do together, and so we had come together to bring in this African children's choir, this Watoto children's choir. I don't know if you've heard of them. In fact, I just saw on Facebook today, Lee Loveridge just has them in his church in Lethbridge tonight or last night. At any rate, a wonderful group of young children who tour around and just sing and praise God. It was awesome. So we had been organizing this whole thing as a ministerial, and various churches took on various aspects of it. Our role as the Lutheran Church was we had them on the Friday. The concert was Friday night, and they were to come to our church on the Friday afternoon. We were gonna, and they had to do homework because they're all school kids, and then we were gonna feed them supper and then go over to the concert. So we did. See if I can make this thing work here. there we go, right there, in the basement of our church.
Hmm.
And we had a wonderful evening. We went. The event was held at the Catholic Church because it was the biggest church and held most people. At any rate, it was a wonderful evening, and at the end, everybody was really inspired, and it was really good. And then all of a sudden, the MC got up and he said, okay, we've just had this wonderful experience with these children, this joyous experience, but I have some news that I have to tell you. I just received word that our Humboldt Broncos hockey team has been in an accident. He said, I don't know any of the details about this yet, but he says, it doesn't look good. And he said, so what the community is doing is we're opening up the arena for everybody to go and gather there, to gather together to pray or to be with each other, just to hang out. And he said, in particular, if any of the clergy here, because it was a church event we were at, like he said, any of you clergy who are here, could you please go over to the arena and make yourselves available to anyone who would like to talk to a pastor as this all unfolds. Well, of course, we went over there to see if we could be of any help. That's didn't know it very good, but that's the Elgar Peterson Arena. Maybe you heard that on the news. At any rate, what we found, there was a lot of bewildered people. Honestly, in my life, I've never seen so many people dumbstruck, like people who absolutely did not know what to say, did not know what to do. And they had the radio station, the local radio station, piped in over the loudspeakers, and people were milling about, standing around, huddled in groups. And the arena began to fill up, literally fill up, in everywhere. And they were piping the news in on the sound system. And as the news began coming in, it became apparent that this was going to be something really bad. And you could see people working their cell phones. They were crying, they were bawling, the people were just, nobody knew what to do. And there's rumors that were running rampant, emotions were high. You know, at the beginning, I can remember there's still an element of hope that maybe it wasn't going to be that bad. Right? But as reports came in and the scope of the tragedy became apparent, people began openly weeping. At first it was 6 people died, then it was 12, then it was 15. And then eventually 16 people killed in that bus crash, including the players, the coach, the trainer, and the radio broadcaster who did the radio broadcast for the local FM station. What happened was they were going up to a game in Nipawin. It was a playoff game, and a semi ran a stop sign and T-boned the bus, and that's kind of what was left of it. You can't see it very good, but all of that is, the bus doesn't exist anymore, and that's what's kind of left of the, maybe you can see it better if I do that, I don't know, maybe it doesn't look very good. But at any rate, that's what was left of the crash site after it happened. All those boxes were what was on the semi, what he was carrying when he hit the bus. And the truth is, it's amazing that anybody walked away from that. I mean, it was literally, there was nothing left of that bus. And so we were in the arena as these pictures and news started coming in. You know, I saw leaders of our community, grown men, bawling. You know, and honestly, I don't always wear my clerical collar. I'm not one of these guys that gets up in the morning and wear my collar all day. But I do wear it for certain functions. And that night I happened to be at a function, and I was really happy. And it really drove it home to me. This is a little side point, but it drove it home to me really importantly that by having my collar on there in the arena that day, I became very visible. And I actually didn't have to go look for people. They came to me, right? There was people, I was surrounded by people. There was people saying, Pastor, can you pray? People I didn't even know, we'd only been there a year. We didn't know everybody in Humboldt. But people were coming up and saying, Pastor, can you pray with us, Pastor? You know, and so basically, at this point, nobody was asking, well, why yet? Nobody was asking, how could a loving God allow something like this to happen? That At that point, we were praying for the first responders, for the families of the people who lost loved ones, for the survivors and their kids. And I got home about 3 o'clock in the morning that night, but there were people that stayed all night and never went home. You know, in a small town like Humboldt, a crash like that is devastating. You know, six of those people that were killed in that crash were from Humboldt. They had grown up there their whole lives. But all the players lived in Humboldt because they lived there half of the year during the hockey season. They were building it out to the families. In our church, we had the grandma and grandpa of Jacob Light. He was one of the ones that was killed from Humboldt. We have a girl that comes to a lot of our youth events and comes to church quite often. Her family billeted 3 of the players. All 3 of them died. And so you can imagine this is hard to process, right? And even if people didn't have a personal connection, a lot of those guys are still in high school, in grade 12. They went to school, they went to the high school. Everybody in Humboldt's been to a Broncos game. You can't live in Humboldt, and it's second only to the Rough Riders, and it's a close second, trust me. And so everybody's been to a Broncos game. You learn the names on the backs of the jerseys. You know who those players are. You know who's leading the scoring. You know what position they're in the standing. Everybody's invested in these guys in a town that size. And so when something like this happens, it literally is devastating. I heard somebody say that night, said, this is our 9/11, and in reality, for a town that size, it is. It was Humboldt's 9/11, and there'll be a memorial service every year for the next 100 years. I'm sure the flags will be at half staff. And so in the midst of all this that was going on that Friday night, our ministerial kind of found a way to kind of get together and huddle in the corner. And we began to talk about what we could do as pastors in the midst of all of this. And you have to understand, in the middle of all of that, the emotions were so raw and so high that we thought, okay, the pastors, who would take a lead in this other than the pastors, right? I mean, who is equipped to deal with this other than the pastors of this community? And so we got together and we sat around a big round table, and we decided that what would be appropriate, the only thing that would make sense would be to have a prayer vigil for the people of the town to come together and heal in the midst of all of this. Where to hold it? Well, somebody said, well, the Catholic Church, it's the biggest church in town. I said, well, why don't we have it here at the arena? Because it's the hockey team. If we have it at the church, for starters, we don't know how big this thing might get, and the church probably might not be big enough. And secondly, if we have it in a church, people are going to think it's a church event, and that might exclude a lot of the people from the community that might otherwise come. So we said, let's have it here. Let's see if we can have it here. And we walked across and talked to the leaders of the Broncos and the arena, and made that suggestion, and they literally pounced on it, because nobody knew what to do. And all of a sudden, somebody was suggesting something to do, right? So this is what we can do. And they pounced on it, and they said, okay. And immediately, the arena manager started getting people together and making phone calls and saying, okay, we can put the plywood out on the floor, we can get the chairs, we have to build a stage, and get the sound system going. It just went just like that. And all of a sudden, the media picked up on it. We found ourselves in front of cameras, talking to media and things. And so this is what the community needed. They needed to come together and pray. And who's the leaders of the community in this regard? Well, it's the pastors. And so this is what was going on everywhere in that arena that night. I can't even explain to you. I can't really explain it to you. You almost have to be there and hope to God you don't ever have to go through this. But it was devastating. And so we got through that night, and as Sunday drew closer, it became apparent that it wasn't just Humboldt that was mourning over this tragedy, but it was the whole country. Letters and media and everything was pouring in from all over the country that this had happened. You know, and the truth is there's always a tragedy somewhere. But there was something about this that really resonated with the Canadian people. And maybe it was because all of those kids were just kids, they were young, they were just kids. Maybe it's because there's a lot of people in this country that have sent their kids on a bus to go play hockey in a neighboring town. I don't know. Maybe it's because Canadians, maybe these kinds of things don't happen in Canada. You know, like they happen when a hurricane hits in Florida or something like that. But whatever it was, it soon became apparent that the arena even wasn't going to be big enough. And so there was this mad scramble to try and get more space. And so the curling rink was opened up, the community hall, the Catholic Church opened up, anywhere where we could put a screen and some speakers. And anywhere that we could find a place to set up some room, people were jammed in, basically. And not even everybody who wanted to get in could get in. All three major networks in Canada, the CTV, Global, and CBC, all said that they would set aside all their regular programming for the evening to accommodate our vigil. Prime Minister Trudeau, Premier of Saskatchewan, all cleared their schedules to be there. Don Cherry and Ron McLean were there, and a lot of NHL celebrities. And as Sunday was kind of coming closer, we were back and forth a lot about this vigil, how it was going to go, and it kind of looked like things were maybe kind of spiraling out of control a little bit with politicians and celebrities and everybody showing up, and we were thinking, we don't want this to be a stump speech for a politician, or we don't want this can't turn into anything like that. The whole intent of this was so that we could pray together as a community over this tragedy that had happened. And so we decided that it needed to stay with the original intent, and Prime Minister Trudeau and Don Cherry and all those people were contacted that they were welcome to come, and we're glad to have them there. But this vigil was going to be for the people of Humboldt, by the people of Humboldt. And so here's where I got my chance. So we had this meeting. And here's where I got to put our Lutheran doctrine and emphasis onto everything. You know, knowing that we had a couple of pastors in our ministerial who might say anything, a couple of pastors who you don't know what they're going to come out with. When we sat there, I said, okay, there's only one thing that's going to help in this situation. That it has to be gospel-centered, it has to be centered on the consolation of the gospel through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and it has to be Christ-centered. Otherwise, there's no point in doing this. And to my surprise, they all agreed, and they said yes. And if you watch that vigil, or parts of it, you know that that's what happened. You know, sure, we could pick a few holes in Sean's little sermon that he did there. He was the chaplain for the team, and you could pick a few holes in this and that. But on the whole, I was very, very pleasantly surprised with my ministerial colleagues, who really pulled through with the gospel. And so think of this: we had the whole country watching. We had an hour and a half of primetime TV on Sunday night with no commercials, no commentary, no politicizing, no eulogizing. No celebrity preachers, no denomination brought in their head bishop or any Billy Graham pastor from Calgary or something like that. It was just 8 pastors from Humboldt with the world watching, and we told them about the eternal hope that we have in Jesus Christ. Honestly, I was amazed how that came off. It had to be a God thing. God's hand was in that the whole way. And here's something I learned from that. When I was talking about this afterwards with Dr. Chambers and President Gimbel, I said that there was a few little takeaways that I got from this whole thing. That's when they asked me if I could maybe come and share them with you. But yeah, there's Prime Minister Trudeau, and can't really see Don and Ron up in there, but they're in there in that crowd there of pictures. But the thing I realize is that to be a voice for the gospel, you need to have a seat at the table. Now let me explain what I mean by that. I'm not a fan of ecumenicalism. Don't get me wrong here. I don't participate in the World Day of Prayer. I don't go and hold hands with the United Church minister and the Catholic priest and say that we're all, rah, rah, we're all together. And I agree with that. I'm not going to join a service where there's prayers to Mother God and all these sorts of silly, foolish things. But I do believe that there's a place for us to work together with our fellow Christians in areas where we can. And at this precise time in Humboldt, this was one of those times. In areas of social ministry and dealing with a crisis, we can't do it all alone. Something of that magnitude, we can't handle that all alone. Or at least we can't be as effective separately as we are together. And so the question is, who's going to be the voice for the gospel, if not us? The truth is, almost every city or town, the confessional Lutherans are one of the smaller groups in the town. Wherever you guys are going to be placed, the Lutheran church isn't going to be the big church in town. I guarantee you, unless it's Middle Lake, that would be the other. Try to look that earlier. But other than that, the Lutheran church is not going to be even close to being the biggest church in town. But that doesn't mean that we're insignificant. Size isn't the important thing. In fact, Jesus always used small things to do big things. He took a small boy's lunch and fed 5,000 people. He took 12 fishermen and made them the leaders of the church when he left. And so we should never be discouraged by being small. And I firmly believe that God has given us, as confessional Lutherans, a specific task. And that is to bring the pure gospel to light in the world around us, even to our ministerial colleagues, even to the people in this world. And to proclaim it boldly and courageously. And here's the thing, in the midst of the tragedy like we had in Humboldt, all those other pastors knew the truth of it. When I said this has to be focused on Christ, it has to be focused on the death and resurrection of Christ, they all agreed. Because deep down, they had nothing else. And they knew it was true. And so, often we see our churches shrinking. We watch our churches getting smaller. We think, oh man, what's the point? But, sometimes we think, well, we think things aren't going well, but the point is this: we have to be there. Because if we don't do it, who else is going to do it? The next Sunday, we had David Friesen from the foundation come. He had been scheduled to talk to us about people donating money to the church in their wills and things like that. He phoned me up and he said, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't tell you what just happened. That would be kind of inappropriate probably for me to talk to you guys, like after all that, right? I said, no. This is exactly the right time for you to come and talk to us about making sure that our churches stay vibrant, stay alive, that we still have a presence in our communities for things just like this. And he made that presentation, and after when he was done, I got up and I said, people were all gathered, I said, so what if we hadn't been here? What if our little St. John's Lutheran Church hadn't been here in the midst of all of this? What would have happened? Oh, there would have been a church. There would have been some churches that would have maybe jumped in. But who would have said it has to be gospel-centered? Who would have said it has to be focused on Christ? Maybe they would have. I don't know. But the truth is that I thank God that I was there. I thank God that I was part of our ministerial, and that the Lord used me to keep that focus on Christ where it belonged. You know, I could have opted out, I could have withdrawn into my bunker, I could have said, I'm not gonna be involved with that, I don't do things with other pastors. And at times, we do have to make that call. But there's other times where we have to think pastorally, where we have to think, what's good for the kingdom of God? What's good in the larger sense? You know, consider that every single person in my congregation was going to be at that vigil, every single one of them. The regular attenders and the not regular attenders, they were all going to be there. Regardless if I was there or not, they were going to be there. Including the couple who lost a grandson and the people who lost the 3 billets. They were all going to be attendants to that vigil. And what would I have gained by staying out of it, is what I asked myself. Because trust me, I had this little battle in my mind before when this was all going, because I know where our church stands on these things, and I get it. And I don't want to be some crusader for, you know, throwing out the baby with the bathwater, but what good would it have done if I'd have stayed out of it? And conversely, what harm would have happened if I'd have stayed out of it? In other words, if all those people from my congregation were in that arena that night for that vigil, and they saw every other pastor there in town except for me, what does that say? What does that say to them? And what harm comes from that? And so yes, we don't have to hold hands with you know, with all the other churches in town and say that we're on the same page and we agree doctrinally and all these things. But there's a time and there's a place, and honestly, I believe that God has called us to be the guardians of the pure gospel. And He calls us to bring that gospel to the fore in every situation. That's what we do. We may never be the biggest church in Canada or in any town that we live in. But that's our role. That's what we do as Lutheran pastors. To bring that, make sure that the gospel is proclaimed. In fact, I firmly believe that if not only should we not be back in our bunkers, but that in our communities, we should be at the front. That we should be leading the charge, the Lutherans. I firmly believe that. I believe that we should be, when people want to talk to a pastor, that the first thing that pops